When one is horrible, it means that there is nothing that is objectively good and progressive that will come out of such individual.
If you have been convicted of an offense before and you have been pardoned, and anybody is trying to bring that up against you and calling you a convict, you have the power to sue that person for defamation.
Justice must not only be done, but it must be seen by all to have been manifestly done.
Every citizen has a right and every citizen has an obligation.
That a plea of ultra-virus acquit or convict is very different from the plea of pardon.
Trespass is that act that interferes with the peaceful.
No matter how minute this,
right? No matter how minute.
Who comes to equity must come with clean hands. Hello, you are welcome to another fresh episode of the program Justify Nigeria on ACNN television, reaching from Abuja. On today's episode, our subject of discussion will be on the supremacy of the Constitution. My name is Anozechi Nomso, your uncle. It is a statement of fact that in any sovereign state, there must be a constitution governing such sovereign states. In Nigeria, for example, the 1999 Constitution as amended is the ground norm that prevails over any other type of law or legislation in this country. This is so because Section 1, subsection 1 of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended states that, and I quote, "This Constitution is supreme, and its provisions shall be binding force on all authorities and persons throughout the Federal Republic of Nigeria," unquote. Furthermore, Section 1, subsection 3 of the same Constitution also provides that, and I quote, "If any other law is inconsistent with the provisions of this Constitution shall prevail, and that other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void," unquote. The questions begging for answers are, why and how did the Constitution have such an enormous power over all other laws in Nigeria? How did Nigeria Constitution come to be? Can there be written an oral constitution in any nation in this 21st century? Joining me now in the studio to address these issues is Barrister Emmanuel Omakalo. He is a legal practitioner of many years of experience, the head of chambers at Hanafi and Associates, and also a member of the Unity Bar here in Abuja. You're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. You know, we talk about Constitution, and oftentimes there are some people, our viewers especially, that are not lawyers like you, who will like to know what it means to have a constitution, or what constitution simply means. So now, to the betterment and understanding of our viewers, based on legal perspective, of course, this Justify Nigeria, what is constitution, and are there types of constitution?
Yes, basically, constitution is the supreme law of a country. It can be written law, it can be unwritten. So it is that law that lays down the rules and procedures of organization, function of the government, and organs of the government, and the relationship between the government and the citizens. That's basically the Constitution. Now, it can be written. When a constitution is written, it means...
let's get it right, that every nation must have constitution. That's what it means.
Every sovereign state must have a constitution. The essence of that is because it's a working tool. Now, with the growth of the society and political participation in government, there is need for the society to have a working tool. This is like a guiding principle. If you don't have a constitution, it becomes more like a banana republic. So for the society,
where anything goes.
No, for the society to have a working tools, a tools that direct them properly, a tools where they derive their power, a tools where the organ derive its own power, a tool where the society and the citizen have their own power. Now, constitution has to be in place. So every democratic government, society, state must have that guiding tools, which is the constitution. Now, that is how the constitution comes to be. Okay. Now, the constitution can be written or unwritten.
Okay.
Now, when a constitution is written, it means that constitution is drafted and codified in a legal document and enacted by a constituent authority. Okay. Now, but when a constitution is unwritten, it means you cannot find it in a single document and it's not enacted by a constituent assembly. Now, what I'm trying to explain is
because I was about trying to break it down so that our viewers who are not last will understand.
When a constitution, like the Nigerian constitution, is written, we have a written constitution in Nigeria. And like some other countries like France, USA, we have written constitution. Now, it means that constitution, you can find it in one document, which is a legal document, codified in that particular document, and it's enacted by the legislatures, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate. They enacted it. That's why I say enacted by a constituted assembly. That's the legislatures who has the obligations of making laws. Now, when a constitution is unwritten, you cannot find it in a single document that is a legal document. You can only find it spread across maybe a charter, a convention, like the United Kingdom have unwritten constitution. But they know that such constitution exists, but not in a single document. They have it scattered around conventions where they know that this exists, but not in a legal document that is a single document as constitution. So that's the way. So it can be written constitution, just like applicable to Nigeria, unwritten constitution, just as applicable to UK. Then because of the nature of those constitution can be rigid or flexible. That cannot be classified as the type.
Okay, I was about asking you. The major type of constitution now is written, which you've explained, yes, and unwritten.
Yes.
And that unwritten oftentimes might be oral. That's what you're saying. Am I correct?
Yes.
And you are now trying to let us know that the one that is written could be rigid, and the one that is not written could be flexible. But it's not type.
It's not type. No, it's the nature.
Okay,
it is the nature of the constitution. One that is written can as well be rigid and flexible. It depends on what is applicable to the particular state. But most time, one that is written is rigid in nature. Where we find the flexibility is when the constitution is unwritten. Okay. But both ways, one that is written, depends on what is applicable to that particular country, can be both rigid or flexible. But so if you bring it down to Nigeria, we have a written constitution, and the nature of our written constitution is rigid.
Okay.
Now, the essence why that is put in place is the constitution contains, because it's a written constitution, so it contains the sovereign will of the people. Now, because it contains the sovereign will, it's assumed that you cannot manipulate those sovereign will of the people to suit your own whims and caprices. That is why the nature of it is rigid. For you to amend it, because of the rigidity nature of the constitution, it has to undergo a procedure, a special procedure, as a matter of fact.
Thank you very much. You've really explained. In fact, somebody who doesn't know what constitution is all about, watching this, we now know that indeed what constitution is all about. Now, in Nigeria, as a state, taking it as a case study, please can you just briefly explain, not just in full details, how Nigerian constitution came to be? Because oftentimes opinions are divided, even some lawyers like you, that this is not supposed to be our constitution. We inherited it from a military, and how did it come to be? 1999 constitution as amended.
Just like I did say at the beginning, with the growth of political participation, there was need for a state to have a working tool. So now, during the Corona era, that was when all this started. In 1913, the British body of council now thought about, okay, we need to have a working tool to guide us on the administration of Nigeria. they came up with a constitution in 1913, which became effective in 1914. Now,
Okay, that the amalgamation now.
Yes. Now, but there were intentions in drafting those constitutions. But between 1914 to some 2, 3 years, 4 years, 6 years later, those were not achieved. That constitution of 1914 was suspended. That gave rise to Clifford Constitution of 1922. Now, what they were trying to do was to see if they can bring a federal structure where the power reside with the governor general then, not a situation whereby most of the powers reside with the regions. So the Clifford Constitution of 1922 could not solve that problem. So the lacuna still exists until the Clifford Constitution was suspended. In place, they brought about the Richard Constitution of 1946. The problem still lingers because the Richard Constitution of 1946 now tends more towards regionalism, where the regions have more powers above the federal character. And even the governors general then that governs Nigeria, remember Nigeria then was as a crown colony,
yes.
They don't have much powers. Much of those powers was based on the regions. So the Richard Constitution of 1946 was not of help. What they did was to suspend that constitution in 1950, and in place came 1951, the McPherson Constitution.
Okay.
Now, the McPherson Constitution now brought about expanded legislation and then introduced that first Federal House of Representatives. The issue also continues because whatever the Federal House of Representatives did, they need to have a resolution ratified by the regional legislatures. They have to make recourse to them. Those resolutions were not coming because the regions felt like they have enormous powers. So it kind of creates a very big challenge because the powers, both legislative powers, still rest more at the regions. So now that constitution was also suspended and it gave rise to Littleton Constitution of 1954. It was that particular constitution that brought about the main federal principle, and it paved way for the independence. So that Littleton Constitution of 1954 paved way for independence because it brought about the federal principle. And that was what the government has been looking at, not a government that based more on the regions, but a government that have a federal character and the principle to govern Nigeria as a single entity. So after the 1954, then we have our independence. They now brought 1960 independence, then the Republic independence of 1963, then to 1979. Now, what we have today is more of adopted from 1979, because what we had previously was under colonial era and under the British body of council. They are the ones who drafted to suit their own pattern of system, which we then call Westminster pattern of system. But from 1979, Nigeria jettisoned that particular aspect and now adopted the American pattern of system, which is presidential in nature. And that presidential in nature pattern of constitution favors the federal principles. So we now adopted the 1979 constitution. From there, the constitution, you know what happened, military and all that, it was suspended until we get to 1999 constitution. So the constitution we have today is more of federal principle and a kind of presidential system of government. That's what is rooted today.
Thank you very much. In fact, you've really showed that you are an international lawyer, bringing all these things together and all that. Thank you very much for that. And now, what do you think, Daddy? Because we've just, listen from our explanation, even the introduction, that constitution of every sovereign state you discover that, of course, there must be other laws and legislations in that sovereign state. But we now see that constitution of every sovereign state takes precedence. But this question, you are going to answer it when we come back for break. Please, viewers, do join us again. Hi, you are welcome to the speaker on ACNN television reaching from Abuja. The speaker is a platform by which we discuss certain things happening in our nation. On today's segment, we'll be looking at thriving Nigeria or striving Nigeria. My name is Anozie Chinomso. To thrive simply means to prosper, grow, to increase and succeed without any sort of hindrance or difficulty. In other words, when a nation thrives, such nation flourishes and increases in advancement of healthy and good fortunes. Striving on its own part is difficult and persistent effort to attain a goal which many a time won't end up without achieving anything. This means that in thriving, our effort is useful, but in striving, our efforts may be wasted. In thriving, you work like an ant and eat like an elephant. But in striving, the reverse or opposite is the case. With the kind of wicked and difficult things happening in Nigeria on a daily basis, I'm moved to ask on whether we are living in a thriving Nigeria or striving Nigeria. In a situation where young Nigerian graduates are roaming about just because they are denied employment on the basis of ethnic extraction and tribal sentiment, establishes the fact that we are living in a striving Nigeria. Where all sectors of Nigeria are in difficulty and in comatose, is also another proof that we are living in a striving Nigeria. Where Independent National Electoral Commission INEC finds it difficult to conduct a free, fair and credible election, is another evidence to affirm that we are living in a striving Nigeria. Where the National Assembly lacks the moral capacity to stop these unnecessary loans, but rather increases their legislative speed in passing every borrowing paper that comes from the executive, thereby subjecting the youths and the generation yet unborn into perpetual slavery, suffering, and death, is a clearer pointer to the fact that we are living in a striving Nigeria. You know, I took time and patiently listened to Mr. President's Independent Day National broadcast on October 1st, 2021. And one of the things that he said was that no government has ever done what I have done in 6 years. This is most laughable. But come to think of it, I think that Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari is correct, you know. This is because no Nigerian president since 1960 has made medical tourism part of his routine, despite promising to end same during his campaign, while allowing doctors in Nigerian hospital to be on strike for over 2 months, and thereby abandoning Nigerian citizens on their health issues, except President Muhammadu Buhari. No Nigerian president has allowed terrorists fester and operate freely in any Nigerian territory since 1960, except President Muhammadu Buhari, to the extent that they now go by the baptismal name of kidnappers, bandits, killer henchmen, and unknown gunmen. No Nigerian president since 1960 has given order that cows must be adequately taken care of at the expense of human being, except President Muhammadu Buhari. No Nigerian president since 1960 has taken favoritism and nepotism to the level it is in Nigeria as of today, with more than 90% of security heads or chiefs in one section of the country to the detriment of others, except President Muhammadu Buhari. Never in the history of Nigeria since 1960 have we had the citizens come out to openly protest against the Nigerian police to show their resentment and displeasure about their oppression in what is now known as #EndSARS, except in the history of the administration of President Muhammad Buhari. Never in the history of Nigeria since 1960 have we had killings of this volume and magnitude like we do have now, to the extent that no day will pass in Nigeria of today without story of killings, except in the history of the administration of President Muhammad Buhari. No president of Nigeria since 1960 has taken infrastructure to another country by constructing roads and railways into Niger Republic, while many Nigerian cities are completely cut off and do not have motorable roads and railways except President Muhammad Buhari. It is therefore on this note that I wish to thank Mr. President for at least being truthful for once in the past 6 years. Well done, Mr. President, and I salute your courage. With all these things happening, do you now agree with me, yes, you watching me, that we are living in a thriving Nigeria? Your answer is as definitely good as mine. Nigeria is indeed a stage where political seasonal films and movies are watched by her citizens every 4 years. And that is why our political leaders usually act for us instead of performing for us. And yet we citizens have the remotes through our PVC, but we are too weak and afraid to change the channel. The problem of Nigeria is that the population of the people that are waiting to steal from the government are more than that of population of the people that are already stealing in government. In all this, I've come to the conclusion that the major problem of Nigeria is that Nigeria do not know her problem. And that is a typical example of a striving Nigeria. In order to justify Nigeria, I therefore speak. Until the electorates in Nigeria know that the power to change their leaders is in their hands, and the political leaders to acknowledge the fact that they are always accountable to the electorates that elected them, and thus serve with sincerity, dignity, honesty, and humility, bearing in mind that Nigeria is the only country that we can call our own. And the earlier we get it right, that will be better for all of us. We shall continue to live in a striving Nigeria instead of a thriving Nigeria. My name is Anozie Chinomso. I just want to speak. Glad to know that you are still there, and our subject of discussion is still the supremacy of Constitution. And right here in the studio, our guest is still here, Barrister Omakan is still here. Then before we went on break, I asked you a question on the issue of the Constitution of every sovereign state having enormous and overriding powers over other legislations. Why is that?
The essence
Yes.
of the Constitution having overriding powers, which is the supremacy of the Constitution, is for the sustenance of democracy. The basic requirement of a constitution to be supreme is to sustain a democracy, promote good governance. We have, just like you rightly said, we have other laws. We have electoral law, Administration of Criminal Justice Act. All these laws are made.
Acts, the FCC Act, those
yes,
things.
These are made by the National Assembly, the legislatures. But of all the laws we have, it is only the Supreme Court that will take precedence above and superiority above all the laws, because the Constitution is the guiding tools for the sustenance of that democracy. All the laws exist on their own, but they must always make recourse back to the Constitution. So the essence of allowing the Constitution to have that overriding power is to deepen and strengthen the democracy. Now, it is assumed by the Constitution that those who wield those powers, our political gladiators, must always act pursuant to the Constitution. That's why from the introduction and from what is stipulated on the Constitution, Section 1, subsection 1 said it. This Constitution shall be supreme. And all authorities and persons shall have a binding force on all persons and authorities throughout the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
So not even the president is above the constitution? That's
No, the constitution is above everybody. That's why your actions and inactions must be subject to the Constitution of Federal Republic of Nigeria. Any action stipulated by the Constitution and one fail to adhere to it means the person have acted ultra vires to the Constitution, and such act is unconstitutional. So the supremacy, the overriding principle, is also stipulated in section 1, subsection 3, when it said, you see all those acts we have mentioned, Electoral Act, EFCC Act, Administration of Criminal, and so many other laws. The Constitution said in section 1, subsection 3, if any of other this law is inconsistent with the provision of the Constitution shall prevail. And those other laws, to the extent of its consistency, shall be void. This is to give that Constitution that overriding powers. This is to give that Constitution that supremacy. Because they understand that that Constitution is our working tool to strengthen and deepen that democracy.
So if there's any other, what you just explained in that section 1 sub 3 is that whatever law that is in conflict with constitution will always be supreme. That's what you just said.
Yes, that's what it means. The Constitution will always be supreme. Because there was issues like that can come up. Maybe the Electoral Act can provide ways of doing things when it comes to filing a process, when it comes to instituting a matter, when it comes to the act of the INEC. And the Constitution may stipulate otherwise. Now, if you are going to court based on those issues, you cannot bring Electoral Act into it. Okay. The provisions of the Constitution will supersede that of Electoral Act or any other law. That is what that particular section is saying. That if there is a conflict, if there is any inconsistency, the provisions of the Constitution will prevail, because that Constitution is the grand norm, because that Constitution is the working tool, because that Constitution is assumed to be our sovereignty. So whatever we are doing must be anchored on it. Now, remember, the Constitution, from the preamble of that Constitution, it said, we, the people of Federal Republic of Nigeria, having firmly and solemnly that particular contract, we entered it freely.
We are not coerced.
We are not coerced. Resolved to provide for a constitution for the purpose of good governance and welfare of all other persons in this country, based on the principle of freedom, equity and justice, and consolidating the peace and unity of our country. We freely give unto ourselves this following constitution. So now that we have come together to give ourselves this constitution, that is our will. So we are trying to guide this judiciously and judicially. That is why we have to accord to that particular constitution that overriding powers. But the challenge we have, as it is presently, is if constitution have those overriding powers, and the preamble of that constitution has stipulated that this is for good governance, for freedom, for welfare of the persons, what we have presently are there those who wield that power and political gladiators, are they acting in accordance with the Constitution? So it has always been a challenge. The Constitution started with the preamble. The Constitution has that supremacy. Now, some persons are still acting ultra via the Constitution and outside the provision of this Constitution.
Which is not right.
And which is not right. And that is not democracy. If we are practicing democracy, and we have anchored it on Constitution, it means that whatever actions we do must be toward the Constitution and must have the support of the Constitution.
Thank you very much. In fact, we are going to bring you back, but before then, we're going to answer just one question. Now, in a constitution, let's assume there's something or issues or how to do things that is not contained in a constitution, for example, and it's not spelled out. What happens if those issues arise in the course of day-to-day living of citizens, and those things are not enshrined by the Constitution, which is our ground norm? What happens in that circumstance?
Nothing. It simply means those things does not exist. We only work with things that exist in the Constitution. So if there is any actions that are not spelled out in the Constitution, it means it does not exist. And it cannot be enforced.
As long as law is concerned, because you cannot tell that to a layman who...
apart from law, that's the common sense. It's just like enters agreement with a party. What is a working tool is that your agreement. So anything not contained in that agreement does not exist. So now the Constitution is the law we have. If there is any action or act that does not contain in the Constitution, it does not exist. Let me give you for an instance. Now, there has been agitation from some quarters about rotational presidency.
Yes.
Now, it's not contained in the Constitution.
Yes.
So, and there is no way it can be implemented as a federal principle because it's not contained in the Constitution. Maybe some political parties may decide within them to zone, but as a federal character,
it does not exist.
So whatever agitations, except until there will be an amendment and they incorporate it into the new Constitution and it will be a working tool.
It's just in half a minute, what's your advice to the general public?
To the general public, Constitution is a tool, it's a working tool. And you have to lay your hands on it. From chapter 4, which contains section 33 to 46, it has to do with our fundamental human right. One who does not know the existence of a law will not know when such right and law is being breached upon. So you need to get your hands on it, study it, and know what is applicable. Now, furthermore, you as a person, the Constitution has given us that sovereignty. The power rests with us. The Constitution has stipulated in its section 44, the sovereignty of this country is with us. If you understand this, that you as a person hold an enormous powers, you can act accordingly by electing the right persons into office.
When you get hold of the Constitution, study it, we know that you have the power to elect the right persons into public office. We want to appreciate you, Barrister, for coming. I'm going to bring you back to explain to us the amendment and the processes we have to undergo and many things we have to know concerning the Constitution. Thank you very much for coming.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The Constitution of a country is supreme and has overriding powers over all other laws and legislations in that country, because it is supposed to be so, and of course it is one of our guiding principles. If a constitution of any sovereign state does not have such authority, citizens of that country may take it as an embodiment of children's rhymes, and of course that will not be fine. In Nigeria, for example, 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as amended, is our supreme law, and that is why it is our ground norm. It is therefore advised that every citizen of Nigeria must endeavor to adhere strictly and obey the contents and provisions of the 1999 Constitution as amended. If, however, you find offensive or disfavorable any content or section of the Constitution, the best option available to you is to approach a court of competent jurisdiction for redress and proper interpretation instead of taking laws into your hands. Always do all you can to be a good and law-abiding citizen of Nigeria. Please remember that if I obey the law, and you obey the law, and our neighbors obey the law, then Nigeria will begin to have a new beginning of positive change that will be better the lives of every citizen of this country. This is where we draw the curtain on today's episode of Justify Nigeria. Join us same time, same station on another fresh episode of the program. Until then, this is Anozie Chinomso wishing you the very best, and bye for now.